So I borrowed this quilt to show you, and it came to be the way they are storing it, in a plastic bag. That's not the way to store a quilt. Let's talk about storing quilts today, and we're going to use the Baby Lock Celebrate Serger to create a custom storage bag for your special quilt. I'm Cathy, and this is Sewing Tech Talk. The giveaway for today's video, a great pack of thread. Every time you like, share, or comment, you're entered to win. This quilt came to me, made it 20 years ago. They were storing it in a plastic bag. Not a good way to store a quilt. Out with the plastic bag. Today I'm going to make a custom storage bag for this quilt. Wanted to show you that, and I want to use the Baby Lock Celebrate Serger because I wanted to use some improvisational piecing and use ideally scraps from the quilt. Although I made this 20 years ago, I don't have any scraps anymore. But putting a bag together to store the quilt serves a couple of purposes. Number one, it's pretty, so you could use it as a gift bag if it was a very special quilt. When you store the quilt in the bag, you kind of see what it was so that you know that this quilt is that. And if something ever happens to the quilt and you're using the scraps from making the quilt, well then you have fabric to mend it if you have to. Trust me, I've had to do that in the past. So, making a bag with improvisational piecing, pretty simple because we're going to use the serger. But let me show you some things about folding the quilt for storage. We're going to do some improvisational piecing, and I want to show you a fun way, even if you've made the quilt out of strips, to make a really cool fabric that we're going to use for the bag. So we're going to set this aside. First, you need to know how to fold a quilt. Because if you fold a quilt straight and straight, just like this, that's really hard on the straight of grain on the side of the quilt. So in the handout, and there's a handout for you in the description, go to the link, click on it, and there's a handout. It's usually highlighted in blue, and all my handouts are there. So it's going to tell you how to do this, but let me show you just briefly. All you do, and it could be any size quilt, you just take the corners and you fold the corners in on the quilt. When you fold the corners in on the quilt, then that fold is along the bias edge. It kind of looks like an envelope when you're done. And if you take the quilt out periodically and refold it, then you're not getting stress on those fibers of the quilt. So just think about that, air it out, refold it every once in a while. And I can fold it small now because all the folds are going to be on the bias. I did this first with that quilt to see how big my bag needed to be. It's basically a pillowcase kind of bag. Could you use a pillowcase? Well, sure, but where's the fun in that? We're going to use the serger to make a custom pillowcase bag. Now, if you're not into making quilt storage bags, no problem. This is also a great method you could use to use up your scraps and make some fun pillowcases. They make great gifts. Kids love them. So now, we know approximately how big it's going to be. And if you measure it, you can kind of get an idea how big the piece of fabric we're going to make right now is going to be to make our pillowcase. Basically, it's double and add some thickness for the quilt. Let's talk about improvisational piecing, because I think it's really, really fun. This quilt behind me, right here, is improvisationally pieced. That's not easy to say. But basically, it's just squares put together quite randomly. Think about it like building blocks. So, I just found some scraps. This is from a quilt that I put together, and it's a bunch of log cabins. And I had four log cabin blocks at the end. Doesn't have to be blocks from the quilt, although it could be. And on this one, I even tried a quilting design that I thought I would like. I didn't. It didn't go into the quilt, but this sample could definitely go into a storage bag. So you're using cool stuff up. So basically, all you're going to do is find your scraps, blocks, whatever, and you're just going to make some building blocks. And here's one I started. Here's a couple smaller pieces. And I took a piece, and you can see this is not well cut, right? It's not. As long as the piece you're joining to the other piece has a straight, so on this piece I cut across there and I had two straight pieces, and then I'm going to trim them so that they're pretty much straight across. Pretty simple to do. After I get it done, Take my mighty rotary cutter, my blade, lay it on there. I can use the seam to make sure that everything's going to be straight, and I just trim it up. I'm not trimming it to any specific size. Why? Because I'm improvisationally piecing it, right? So there it is. Turn to the other side, and I'm going to get it kind of straightish. It doesn't matter the size. It just matters that I'm cutting off that nasty bit. And you can do this as you go. I find this kind of a fun process. So I just take my pieces and parts and I put them together. However I put them together, it doesn't matter. Pour yourself a cup of tea and just have fun kind of putting things together and see what comes out of it. The unfortunate thing is you might end up with a really cool quilt. So that's kind of fun. We're going to go to the serger and I'm going to show you that basically a serger seam is a great seam to put this together. Why? Because this is not going to be lined when we make a pillowcase out of it. I want the inside seams to be finished off. And if they're raw or not finished, they're going to ravel. Could I do this on a sewing machine? Well, sure, I could. But then after I sew the seam, I would come back and I'd be doing a zigzag stitch along there, an overcasting stitch. It's not quite as fast on a sewing machine as it is on a serger. Serger's like an ideal machine for this. So we're going to use the Celebrate for that. We're going to go over and I'm going to sew some pieces together and give you a visual. But I wanted to tell you about another style of improvisational piecing before we get there. What if you had made a quilt out of strips? And I did. I made this log cabin out of all different strips. And I, quite frankly, had some left over, not just blocks, but strips. So what would you do for that? Well, there's a fun way to put strips together, and it's called the jelly roll race. I didn't come up with it, but I think it's a fun way to use up your strip scraps. And so behind me, you can see that I got a little crazy cutting strips for this log cabin quilt, and I had a whole bunch left over. So these are all strips that have been sewn together in the jelly roll race style, and I think it actually makes a really pretty quilt. I might not make a pillowcase out of that one. I might actually use that as a quilt. But let me show you real briefly how you do that. I had scraps from this quilt, so here they are. Whole bunch of scraps of strips. And what you do is you take your strips and you sew your strips together end to end. Super, super long strip, right? Now, you can sew them together straight across. This quilt, I had some 60-degree angles left over on my strips, so I sewed those together with a 60-degree angle. And you can see I have some jaunty little lines going this way, this way. If you don't have enough scraps, throw in some ringers. It's okay. It's gonna look beautiful however you do it. I do like that diagonal join because let me show you what that looks like. Here it is. And there's that diagonal joint. Doesn't that look kind of cool? In fact, when I sewed it together, I went some this way and some that way. This might turn out to be a really cool quilt. So you'll see when we go to the serger and we sew this together, that what you do is you take the two strips, you start at the end, and you just sew them together side by side right along that long edge. Then when you get those two sewn together, then you sew 2 to 2. And then when this is done, now this is going to go 4 to 4, and it just grows exponentially that way. It's a really cool way to use up scraps, and it's called a jelly roll race. Well, go to YouTube and look up jelly roll race. It's kind of a fun way that quilters can compete. So that's that. We're going to play with that over there at the serger as well. We're going to put all these together. But I want to show you briefly, I need to go to English school. I've already got the pillowcase started for the other quilt, and here it is. Oops. Everything wants to stay on the mannequin. Okay, so I had a leftover when I did a test sew for the center of that quilt, right? Here's my leftover. It's the back side of it. Yes, after 20 years, I still had that test. Don't judge me. So I went ahead and I put this all together, and now it's just big enough for that quilt to go in. And basically on the one end, I improvisationally pieced it. I just took all my beige fabrics and put them all together. It's going to look cool, trust me. On the one end though, I did keep it all the same. And this is going to be like the band on the edge of the pillowcase. When the folded quilt goes in here, fits in no farther than maybe here. Hope you can see that. And then this part right here, this will just fold over the end when it goes on the shelf, and it'll be really nice and contained. I could even actually at the very end, if I want to put some buttons there, I could put a zipper in it. It's just elaborate as you want to make this little storage case. So let's head over to the serger, and I want to show you how I sew this seam right here, and then we're going to box the corners just like we do for like a tote bag or like a paper bag fold on the very bottom. So we'll head off to the serger, we'll get it all threaded up, and I'm going to do some improvisational piecing, and we'll just put this together, lickety split. This quilt's going to be stored the right way. So here we are at the Baby Lock Celebrate Serger, and I'm going to use it to put together my improvisational piecing. We're going to thread it up. I'm going to use a light gray thread, and you can get an assortment pack of thread when you get a serger. Light for light, dark for dark. Medium gray is kind of a nice little medium. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to thread up the serger. I'm going to use a 3-thread wide, and basically any kind of basic overlock stitch is going to work for putting this together, but let's get the machine threaded up. So it is a self-threading serger, and to thread it, I'm just going to push in this button, turn the knob on the side, and the machine's going to lock into its happy place. I just take the thread, pull it on down from the slot, stick the thread into the threading port, just like that. Make sure I have enough, and when I push the button, voila! Then that lower looper is threaded. I don't have to thread in any particular order. I do have to tell the machine I'm going to thread the upper looper. Literally just take the thread, stick it into the threading port, and push the button, and boom, that's threaded all the way through this upper looper up here. I don't have to do anything to it. It's ready to go, but we will need a needle thread. I have it in the left-hand position. I'm going to take the thread, come over here just like this. So it's going to come down through this little guide here on the top. And if we thread your loopers, we don't make you work to thread your needles. But I am going to release the tubular loopers. On the side, I'm just going to put the 2 green lines together. Bring this down. Literally, it catches the thread. Oops, hold on. Catches the thread, pulls it through the needle. Boom, threaded. Now if I wasn't talking yama yama yama, we would have been threaded in 30 seconds flat. And we're pretty much good to go. There we go. It's all thread control when you come to sergers. Close it on up. I can have basically any setting I want because it doesn't really matter with this pillowcase. I do want a fairly shortest stitch length, so I'm going to be around a 2, and any cutting width's going to do. I'm going to be right around a 7.5 for this particular seam. Okay, so here is my fabric. I have it put together with some just wonder clips holding it on the side. I like wonder clips when I'm sewing on a serger. Notice the ends don't match necessarily. I'm just going to trim them off. Remember, I'm just putting together kind of like building blocks. So I'm going to put it under here and find my foot control. I'm going to trim off a little bit, lower the presser foot, that's key, and take out my clips as I go. I have a little bit of thread up here. Notice the serger's going to go fast. Now I'm not gathering, so I'm not using my differential feed. And notice how it's clean finishing. So that worked out really, really nice. Notice after I threaded my Baby Lock serger, first time, every time, it's going to work. Now here this is. Now I'm improvisational piecing, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another piece here so that it matches my block. And it's not the straightest, so I could trim that off and make it straight, or I have a serger. So if I'm pretty good at eyeballing it, remember, you might want to be making these lickety split. I can put that on there, and I just want to sew so that I'm coming at a 90-degree angle to that seam. Well, let's see if I could do that. I did pretty good. Now remember, these could all be different fabrics. This could be blocks. So it's going to go together pretty fast. I hope you can see that a serger for putting this together, it's going to go really lickety split. So can you do it on the sewing machine? Absolutely. Jelly roll race! Now what I do is I put the 2 strips to the 2 strips and continue the jelly roll race. Pretty cool! But after you sew it, you'd come through and you would kind of clean finish those edges. So now I have my pillowcase storage bag finished for this one, and it's basically putting it together now. And I clipped the side, I folded it right sides together. We're going to do that side seam. I'm using these extra large Wonder Clips. Now, your choice. You can be quick, 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 fast. I did not trim off this edge because you can see on improvisational piecing, sometimes you get this kind of goofy edge. I did kind of draw myself a line right up here because I want this end to be kind of straightish, and I didn't have anything to go with. But you can trim it off, or you could let the serger do it. I think you can guess what I'm going to do. I'm going to let the serger trim it as I go. So let's do this side seam. It's going to go lickety split. We're going to trim off this mark that I made. And I am kind of matching this seam right here, which is this first seam of that band. And I'm just going to try to go straight as I go. Here's seam 1. Now let's do the bottom. Now when I do the bottom, if I'm coming up to a folded edge, I'm going to start from the seam to the bottom because everything's going to work out. Sometimes if you go this way, it kind of gets off a little bit. So let's do that, and let's box our corners, and we're going to be almost done. Were you timing me? That was pretty fast, wasn't it? Now one thing I am going to do is I am going to take this end up here. This is the opening end. And I'm going to take it and I'm going to fold it back upon myself. I might want to fold this end under and then stitch it down. I might use a sewing machine for that. You could also take it and you could also put some buttons in here with buttonholes. Pretty simple to do. Don't necessarily have to do that, but that is that end that the pillowcase goes in, that the quilt goes in, that looks kind of like a pillowcase. But I want to show you real quick how to box the corners. Now here's the bottom corners. Here they are, and we're kind of going to make this kind of like a paper bag bottom. And this is the same procedure you would use to make like a tote bag. This is just kind of a really big tote bag. I'm going to take it. Now, It's not tricky. I'm going to take it and I'm going to pull it so that the bottom seam and the side seam are right together. So I'm going to turn it around so that you can see it. So there's the bottom seam and then there's the side seam. So you can hopefully see that. And everything's coming up here. Everything's coming up roses towards the point. Okay? Now, here's my little corner guy. Now you're going to sew across here and the serger's going to trim it. But the trick is to make it match is however far you're sewing down here, you want to sew that same distance on the other side. So let's take our clip, right? We're going to put our extra large clip on there to hold that. Now, how far do you sew down? Well, you want this distance to be the distance that the thickness of your quilt or the width of your bag or whatever. It's pretty simple. And when I'm sewing, I'm going to sew that I sew parallel to those seams. It's a pretty simple process. Fuss around with it. Once you kind of manipulate it, you could even practice sewing it on a sewing machine if you're not 100% sure what you're going to do. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to sew across here. I'm going to remember that distance, and I'm going to have a scrap that's going to help me. You'll see. Let's sew that down. So here we are. I have determined that I pretty much need to be right about in here. That distance is going to be the width of my little pillowcase. So let's take this out. Let's get started. Now these two seams, you can see they're kind of coming together on the side. And I'm sewing so I'm coming straight across there. The serger did a great job on that, and every seam is nice and professionally finished. Now let's do the other corner, and I want to show you this trick. Well, here's the scrap I took off, right? So let's fold this. You know how to do it now. Open it up. Here we go. Open it up so that you have that seam going across there, and the bottom seam is going to match the side seam. And I'm just going to use this part right here to know the distance that I cut. That's the distance, so I'm just going to cut along in here. You can take a marker and you can mark that if you need to, but it's as simple as that. So I hope you can see that's pretty lickety split. Let me just show you the bottom really quick before I sew the other one, just so that you can see. It's a big pillowcase. Ooh, wouldn't that be a great gift? You could make a big body pillowcase, custom, do some embroidery on there. Look at that corner. This is going to be so cool. I think that you might want to make pillowcases. Definitely. Next time you make that really fancy quilt, make a bag to go with it. Present it because you want them to treasure that quilt that you spent so much time on. I know I do. And down the road, 20 years from now, when you borrow it back just to take a picture, it won't come to you in a plastic bag. I'm Cathy. This has been Sewing Tech Talk. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to send it off to George. Now remember, your first purchase, that's a really good sewing machine. But right after that, even if you're a quilter, you're probably going to want a serger. Take it away, George.
Thanks, Cathy. Once again, that was an incredible presentation. Don't forget to click on the link and download the notes for Sewing Tech Talk with Cathy. Now, Babylock invented the serger back in 1967, and throughout the years, they've had many innovations that have separated them from all others. The Babylock Celebrate is one of their most popular models. It has their original jet air threading that threads both loopers with a burst of air. It also has a needle threader that's very easy to work with. It can sew on all kinds of fabric because of the differential feed. You can even gather with it. You can instantly turn a knob and do a rolled edge, which is beautiful for napkins. It also works with a wide variety of thread. Right now, this machine is on sale. It has a regular retail price of $2,499, but we have it on sale for $1,199. But wait, we're offering a bonus for a limited time. Right now, when you purchase the Babylock Celebrate, you get 24 spools of Madeira Aerolock thread, plus a membership to Love of Knowledge. This is where you can get online training in all kinds of techniques on this serger, our sergers in general. If you have any questions on this or other baby lock models, give us a call at 1-800-865-9664 or click on the link to order your baby lock. Celebrate today. Bye for now.